Judge Harold Bennett leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers drumming lazily against the polished wood of his desk. He peered down at the defendant over the rim of his glasses, his lips twisting into something between a smirk and a sneer. "You think you're some kind of legal expert, kid?" His voice carried a dry amusement. "This isn't a debate club." A few chuckles rippled through the courtroom. The bailiff, the stenographer, even the prosecutor. They were all in on the joke. But the young man standing at the defendant's table didn't flinch. He wasn't laughing. His name was Marcus Carter, 19 years old, accused of grand theft auto and resisting arrest. The charges were serious, but the way Judge Bennett looked at him made it clear the real trial had nothing to do with the law. Marcus stood with his hands in his pockets, his chin lifted just enough to show he wasn't afraid. He had spent years preparing for this moment. Not this exact one, but he knew the courtroom like the back of his hand. While other kids memorized basketball stats, he memorized case law. While his friends played video games, he played mock trials in his head, arguing imaginary cases with himself. His mother, Evelyn Carter, had worked as a paralegal for over 20 years, and Marcus had grown up listening to the stories she brought home. How prosecutors cut corners, how judges played favorites, how some defense attorneys barely tried. By the time he was 14, he could break down a trial better than most law students. But none of that mattered to Judge Bennett. To him, Marcus was just another kid in trouble. "Let's make this quick," the judge sighed, flipping open the case file. "I have a golf game at 2. The audience chuckled again, but this time, something shifted. Marcus's lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smirk, because Judge Bennett had just made his first mistake. But the courtroom hadn't noticed yet. The prosecutor, Daniel Harper, rose from his seat with the air of a man who had already won. His suit was crisp, his tie perfectly knotted, and his voice carried that rehearsed confidence of someone who had delivered the same speech 100 times before. "Your Honor, the state will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant, Marcus Carter, was caught red-handed in a stolen vehicle, a 2022 Audi A6, reported missing just hours before his arrest. Officers pursued him through downtown, where he allegedly attempted to flee before being apprehended. His fingerprints were found on the steering wheel. The prosecution submits that the evidence speaks for itself." The words landed with weight. The crowd in the gallery shifted, whispering among themselves. On the surface, it sounded damning. A stolen car, a chase running. Judge Bennett glanced at Marcus over the rim of his glasses, then turned back to Harper. "Go on." Harper walked toward the jury box, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. "The defense may try to convince you that this was all a misunderstanding, that Mr. Carter is some unfortunate victim of circumstance." He turned, locking eyes with Marcus for the first time. "But let's be honest, what kind of victim runs from the police?" The tension in the room thickened. Judge Bennett leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. Marcus didn't blink. Harper continued, flipping through a stack of papers. "Your Honor, I have here the testimony of Officer Ryan Mitchell, who personally witnessed the defendant behind the wheel before he attempted to flee. The car was confirmed stolen. The arrest was made by the book." Bennett exhaled through his nose, nodding. "Sounds straightforward to me. And for most people in the room, it probably did. The case was clear-cut. A stolen car, a chase, an arrest. But Marcus had spent too many years studying trials not to see the cracks. Still, he stayed silent, watching, waiting. Judge Bennett tapped his gavel lightly. "All right, let's hear the defense's response." He turned to Marcus's lawyer, a public defender named Sarah Collins, who had barely said 3 words since stepping into the courtroom. She stood up, shifting nervously. "Your Honor, my client." Marcus placed a hand on her arm, a silent request. She hesitated, then sat back down, and for the first time, Marcus spoke. "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor." The room went completely silent. Bennett stared at him, clearly amused. "You what?" Marcus's voice was calm, steady. "I'll be defending myself." A murmur spread through the courtroom. The bailiff's eyebrows shot up. Harper's smirk faltered for just a second before he let out a sharp laugh. This should be interesting. But no one was laughing when Marcus took his first step forward, because everything was about to change. The weight of the courtroom settled around Marcus as he adjusted his stance, his hands still in his pockets. He let the silence stretch just a little longer, enough to make them uncomfortable. Then finally he spoke. "Your Honor, before I begin, I'd like to confirm something with the prosecution." Harper raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms. "Go ahead." Marcus took a slow step forward. "You said Officer Ryan Mitchell personally saw me behind the wheel before I was arrested, correct?" Harper exhaled sharply, already bored. "That's right. And that testimony is written in his report." "Of course it is." Marcus nodded. Then he turned to Judge Bennett. "Your Honor, I move to dismiss that testimony as evidence." Bennett squinted at him. "On what grounds?" Marcus pulled his hands from his pockets for the first time and gestured toward the prosecution's table. "Because Officer Mitchell wasn't even on duty when the chase began." A flicker of confusion crossed Harper's face. "What are you talking about?" Marcus took another step forward. "Your Honor, if the court allows me, I'd like to submit a request to verify Officer Mitchell's GPS logs from that night. If his report says he witnessed me in the vehicle, then it should match his location history. But," he let the word hang in the air, "I have a feeling it won't." Now the murmurs in the gallery grew louder. Bennett frowned, glancing toward Harper. "Counselor?" Harper cleared his throat, his jaw tightening. "That report was filed by an officer of the law. Your Honor, are we really going to take the word of a defendant over a trained professional?" Marcus gave a small, almost casual shrug. "If the officer was where he claimed to be, then the GPS data will prove it. But if he wasn't..." He let the sentence trail off. Bennett studied him for a long moment, then turned to Harper. "Does the prosecution have any issue with verifying the officer's GPS logs?" Harper hesitated. The pause was just long enough. The jury noticed, the gallery noticed, and most importantly, the judge noticed. Marcus took a quiet breath. He had spent years watching trials, studying prosecutors, their tactics, the way they played the system. And there was one thing he knew without a doubt. If Harper was confident in his case, he wouldn't be stalling. Bennett sighed, rubbing his temple. "Counselor?" Harper finally shook his head. "No objections, Your Honor." But the shift had already begun. For the first time, the courtroom wasn't laughing anymore. The courtroom was silent, but the tension was loud. Harper shuffled his papers, his polished confidence cracking around the edges. "Your Honor, while we wait for the GPS records, the fact remains that the defendant's fingerprints were found on the steering wheel of the stolen vehicle." Marcus gave a small nod, his face unreadable. "That's true." He took a step forward. "But let's talk about that evidence for a second." Bennett raised an eyebrow, gesturing for him to continue. Marcus turned to the jury, making eye contact with each one of them. "The prosecution wants you to believe that finding my fingerprints in a car means I stole it. That's the story they're selling. But let's think about this logically." He took a deep breath, his tone staying calm, controlled. "Let's say you walk into a department store and try on a jacket. You put your hands in the pockets, maybe zip it up, then put it back on the rack and walk out. A few hours later, someone shoplifted that jacket. Would the fact that your fingerprints are on it mean you stole it?" A few jurors exchanged glances. Someone in the gallery muttered something under their breath. Marcus didn't give them time to recover. "The car in question was parked outside of 7-Eleven hours before the alleged theft. I was inside that store with 3 friends. And yes, when we walked past the car, I leaned against it. I even opened the door because it was already unlocked. I didn't think much of it. Didn't take the car, didn't drive it, didn't steal anything from inside. Just a dumb moment of curiosity." He let that sit for a second, then, in a voice that cut through the silence like a scalpel, he asked, "Does touching something make you a criminal?" Harper cleared his throat, flipping through his notes, searching for something, anything, to regain control. But Marcus wasn't finished. "And while we're on the topic, let's talk about how that fingerprint analysis was done." He turned to Bennett. "Your Honor, was a forensic specialist from this case subpoenaed to testify?" Bennett blinked, caught off guard by the question. He glanced at Harper. The prosecutor hesitated, then reluctantly said, "No." Marcus's lips pressed together. "So, let me get this straight. The state is using forensic evidence to try and convict me, but they didn't think it was necessary to bring in the actual specialist who processed that evidence? No chance for me to cross-examine, ask about the chain of custody, or challenge the accuracy of the analysis. Harper's jaw tightened. Marcus nodded, like that was all he needed to hear. Interesting. Judge Bennett sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. It was the look of a man realizing this case was not the easy win he had assumed it would be. But Marcus wasn't done yet, because the next thing he was about to say would change everything. Marcus took a slow step forward, his voice steady but firm. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence an official statement from the owner of the vehicle. Bennett frowned. The owner? Marcus nodded. Yes, Mr. David Reynolds, the registered owner of the stolen Audi, provided a statement to the police that, for some reason, was never submitted in the prosecution's filings. And I think I know why. He turned to Harper. Do you recall what Mr. Reynolds told officers the night his car was reported stolen? Harper's jaw clenched. He knew exactly what was coming. Marcus didn't wait for him to answer. Instead, he pulled out a printed transcript from his file and read aloud. I left my car running when I ran inside the gas station. Some kid must have jumped in and taken off. But it wasn't the guy you arrested. I saw the kid and he was white. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Marcus held the paper up. That's from the original police report. The same report the prosecution conveniently never mentioned. He turned back to Judge Bennett. The arresting officer admitted this in his testimony. The prosecution ignored it. And yet, they want this jury to believe that someone who doesn't even match the description of the real thief, was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Harper stepped forward, scrambling. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. The defendant was caught in possession of the vehicle. But Marcus shook his head. No, I wasn't. His voice didn't rise, but it cut through the courtroom with sharp precision. I was arrested blocks away from where the vehicle was abandoned, walking home after getting snacks with my friends. I wasn't in the car. I wasn't near the car. I wasn't running from anything. The only thing tying me to this case is bad police work and assumptions. Judge Bennett let out a slow breath, rubbing his temple. The case was unraveling fast, and everyone knew it. Marcus turned back to the jury. The real suspect got away that night. The officers found a black kid in the same general area and decided that was close enough. That's what this case is really about. Silence. Bennett cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. Does the prosecution have anything further? Harper was stiff, his face flushed. No, Your Honor. Judge Bennett exhaled. He looked at Marcus for a long time, then glanced at the jury. Finally, he leaned forward and spoke the words that would stay with everyone in that room. Case dismissed. A beat of stunned silence, then chaos. Half the courtroom erupted, some in disbelief, some in quiet relief. The gallery stirred, reporters scribbling in their notebooks. Marcus didn't move right away. He let the moment settle, let the reality sink in for everyone. Judge Bennett, still gripping his gavel, looked at Marcus with an unreadable expression. There was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Recognition, maybe even regret. Marcus met his gaze, then turned to leave. But just as he reached the door, the judge spoke again. Mr. Carter. Marcus stopped but didn't turn. Bennett hesitated, then finally said, You should consider law school. Marcus smirked. He didn't need to consider it. He was already on his way. Outside the courthouse, the air was thick with voices. Reporters swarmed the steps, their cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Marcus, did you know the judge would dismiss the case? What are you going to do next? How does it feel to outmaneuver a seasoned prosecutor? Marcus pulled his hoodie over his head, ignoring the questions. He wasn't interested in the spectacle. This wasn't about proving how smart he was. It was about something bigger. His mother, Evelyn, was waiting for him at the bottom of the steps. Her arms were crossed, her face unreadable. For a long moment, she just looked at him. Then, finally, she shook her head and let out a breath. Boy, you scare me half to death. Marcus chuckled, scratching the back of his head. Had to take a risk, Ma. She stared at him a second longer, then pulled him into a tight hug. You always were the stubborn one. The cameras kept flashing, but Marcus wasn't paying attention to them anymore. Across the street, standing by his car, Judge Bennett watched. His posture was different now. The arrogance was gone. His expression wasn't amused anymore. It was something else, something closer to reflection. He hadn't expected this case to be anything more than routine. Just another day, another defendant, another guilty plea. But now he knew he'd remember this one. Because Marcus had done something most people never could. He made the system look at itself. And for once, it blinked first.